Padre Pio looked at the woman kneeling in his confessional and saw something that made the blood drain from his face. She had been confessing for 3 minutes, standard sins, missing evening prayers twice, a moment of impatience with her husband, a white lie to a neighbor about why she could not attend a dinner, small sins, venial sins, the kind of sins that most priests would absolve in 30 seconds with a gentle reminder to pray 3 Hail Marys. But Padre Pio was not looking at her words. He was looking at her soul, and on her soul, buried beneath all the minor sins she had just confessed, he saw a mark so dark and so deep that it made every other sin look like a smudge of dust on a white tablecloth. This mark was not large, it was small, tiny in fact, no bigger than a coin. But it was blacker than anything Padre Pio had seen in years of hearing confessions from murderers, adulterers, and blasphemers. And the woman had no idea it was there. She did not know she was carrying it. She had never confessed it. She had never even recognized it as a sin. Because the sin that was destroying her soul had taken only 3 seconds to commit. 3 seconds. The time it takes to draw a single breath, the time it takes to glance at someone's face and look away, the time it takes to form a single thought and let it pass. 3 seconds that Padre Pio said had condemned more souls to purgatory and even to damnation than adultery, theft, and blasphemy combined. If you think your small sins do not matter, if you think the quick thoughts that flash through your mind are too brief to register in the spiritual world, if you think that what you feel for 3 seconds and then forget cannot possibly affect your eternal destiny, then what I am about to reveal will shake you to the core of your faith. Let me tell you something most people do not realize. The most dangerous sins are not the ones that make you feel guilty. The most dangerous sins are the ones you commit so quickly and so naturally that you never even notice them. They fly below the radar of your conscience. They are too small for your moral alarm system to detect. And because you never detect them, you never confess them. And because you never confess them, they remain on your soul, week after week, month after month, year after year, growing darker, growing deeper, like a single drop of ink falling into a glass of clear water every day. On the first day, the water looks the same. On the 100th day, the water is black. Padre Pio understood this with a clarity that tormented him, because he could see the ink. He could see every single drop that had ever fallen into a person's soul. And what tormented him most was not the people who came to him with great sins. Those people knew they needed help. They came broken and desperate and ready to change. What tormented Padre Pio were the people who came to him with clean consciences and dark souls, the people who genuinely believed they were righteous, the people who had no idea that the smallest sin they had never noticed was the one that was slowly, silently, irreversibly destroying them from the inside. The woman in the confessional was named Graziella Martinelli. She was 55 years old, from Manfredonia, a coastal town about 30 kilometers from San Giovanni Rotondo. She was, by every visible measure, one of the most devout Catholics in her parish. She attended daily Mass without exception. She prayed the rosary every morning and every evening. She volunteered at the parish school teaching catechism to children. She organized the annual procession for the feast of the town's patron saint. She was the woman other women in the parish looked to as an example of how to live a Catholic life. Her husband Domenico was a fisherman, a quiet man who left before dawn and returned after sunset, his hands rough from nets and his clothes smelling of salt and sardines. They had 3 children, all grown. Their oldest son worked in the post office. Their daughter had married a shopkeeper in Foggia. Their youngest was studying at the seminary in Bari. Their marriage was stable, unremarkable, held together by routine and mutual respect more than by passion. Graziella had no dramatic sins to confess because she had constructed her entire life to avoid drama. Everything was orderly. Everything was predictable. Everything was controlled. She was the kind of woman who dusted the tops of door frames, the kind of woman who ironed bed sheets, the kind of woman who knew the exact number of rosary beads between each mystery, not because she counted them in prayer, but because she counted everything in life. Control was her architecture. Piety was her decoration. And together they created a life that looked from every external angle like a model of Catholic devotion. But there was one person in Graziella's life who disrupted her carefully maintained spiritual equilibrium. Her sister-in-law, Lucia. Lucia had married Domenico's younger brother, Pasquale, 20 years earlier. Pasquale was everything Domenico was not. Impulsive, unreliable, prone to drinking and gambling. He had squandered whatever small savings the family had and eventually abandoned Lucia and their 4 children to chase work in the north. He sent money occasionally. He wrote letters less and less frequently, and then he stopped writing altogether. Lucia was left alone with 4 children in a 2-room apartment above a butcher shop. She took in laundry. She cleaned houses. She sold eggs from the 3 chickens she kept on the balcony. She survived, barely, on the margins of a town that had very little margin to spare, and Graziella despised her for it. Not openly, never openly. Graziella was far too sophisticated in her piety for open contempt. She brought Lucia food baskets at Easter and Christmas. She offered to take Lucia's children to catechism. She spoke about Lucia to other women in the parish with the specific tone of voice that sounds exactly like compassion, but is actually its opposite. Poor Lucia, how she struggles. I pray for her every day. Words that on the surface were charitable, but underneath carried the unmistakable message. I am better than her. My life is better than hers. My husband is better than hers. My faith is better than hers. Thank God I am not Lucia. And every time Graziella saw Lucia, whether passing her in the market or glimpsing her hanging laundry from the balcony of that cramped apartment, something happened inside Graziella that lasted exactly 3 seconds. A flash, a pulse, a single, instantaneous thought that was so fast it barely registered in Graziella's conscious mind before it was gone. Thank God I am not her. 3 seconds, 5 words, and then it was over. Graziella would continue with her day, her rosary, her mass, her catechism class, her procession planning, and she would not think about that thought again until the next time she saw Lucia, which was almost every day, which meant that almost every day for 20 years, Graziella had committed a sin she did not even know was a sin. A sin that Padre Pio, looking at her soul through the screen of the confessional on that October afternoon in 1958, could see with devastating clarity. You have not confessed the sin that is killing your soul, Padre Pio said quietly. Graziella's breath caught. She had confessed everything, she was certain of it, every impatience, every white lie, every missed prayer. What could she have forgotten? Last Thursday, Padre Pio said, you were walking through the fish market. You passed a woman carrying a basket of laundry on her head. You looked at her, and for 3 seconds you thanked God you were not her. Graziella felt the ground shift beneath her knees, because Padre Pio was right. She had passed Lucia last Thursday in the market. She had looked at her. She had felt that familiar, fleeting pulse of superiority. And then she had forgotten it entirely. The way you forget a sneeze, the way you forget adjusting your glasses. How? She stammered. How could you know that? Because the mark it left on your soul is darker than any sin you have confessed today, Padre Pio said. And it is not one mark, it is thousands, layer upon layer upon layer. 20 years of marks, all in the same place, all from the same sin, all building on top of each other until the spot on your soul where that thought lives has become as dark as a coal that has been burning for decades. Graziella began to cry. Not gentle tears, the gasping, choking tears of a woman who has just been shown something about herself that she cannot deny and cannot bear. Padre Pio waited until the tears subsided. Then he spoke words that I believe every Catholic alive today needs to hear. Because what he said next was not just for Graziella, it was for everyone who has ever looked at another human being and, for even a single second, felt superior. He said, "Do you know who else prayed those exact words? Do you know who else stood before God and said, 'I thank you that I am not like that person'?" The Pharisee in the temple, standing next to the tax collector. And Jesus said that the tax collector went home justified, and the Pharisee did not. Do you understand what that means, Graziella? The Pharisee was not forgiven. The man who prayed, the man who fasted, the man who tithed, the man who kept every law, was not forgiven, because his prayer was not prayer. It was contempt disguised as gratitude, and God does not accept disguised contempt. God sees through every disguise instantly. And what he sees behind your "thank God I am not her" is not gratitude. It is pride. And pride is the sin that created Satan. Graziella was shaking. She tried to speak, to defend herself, to explain that she had never intended to hurt Lucia, that she had always helped her, always prayed for her. But Padre Pio raised his hand gently. "Intention does not matter here," he said. "You did not intend to poison your soul. Carbon monoxide does not intend to kill the family sleeping in the house. But the result is the same. Intention without awareness is not innocence, it is blindness. And blindness in the spiritual life is the most dangerous condition a soul can suffer, because the blind person does not know they cannot see." Hold on, because what Padre Pio revealed next about the spiritual mechanics of contempt is something that will change how you examine your conscience forever. He explained that the sin of spiritual contempt, the sin of looking at another person and feeling superior to them, is not merely a sin against that person. It is a sin against the body of Christ itself, because every baptized Catholic is a member of the body of Christ. When you look at another member of the body and feel contempt, you are looking at Christ and feeling contempt. When you silently thank God that you are not like Lucia, you are silently thanking God that you are not like a part of his own body. You are rejecting a limb of Christ while claiming to love Christ. And this, Padre Pio said, creates a fracture in your soul that is unlike any other type of spiritual wound. He called it la frattura del disprezzo, the fracture of contempt. He said he could see it in Graziella's soul as clearly as a doctor sees a fracture on a bone scan. It was a crack that ran through the center of her spiritual identity. And through that crack, everything she poured into her soul, every prayer, every rosary, every communion, was slowly leaking out. Like water poured into a cracked vessel. The vessel looks full from the outside, but inside it is always emptying, always draining, always losing what it should be holding. This is what truly matters, and I need you to hear this with everything you have. Graziella had prayed the rosary twice a day for 20 years. She had attended daily Mass for 20 years. She had received communion thousands of times. And every single one of those graces, every drop of spiritual water poured into her soul through prayer and sacraments, had leaked out through the fracture of contempt. She was spiritually bankrupt despite doing everything right. She was a cracked vessel, overflowing with effort and empty of grace. And she never knew, because the crack was on the inside, because contempt does not feel like a sin. It feels like perspective. It feels like discernment. It feels like the natural, reasonable assessment of someone who clearly made worse choices than you did. And that is exactly what makes it so deadly. It is the one sin that successfully impersonates virtue. I have to tell you something personal, because when I first understood this teaching, it hit me like a physical blow. I was sitting in my living room in Coventry, reading about Padre Pio's encounters in the confessional, and I suddenly realized that I had been Graziella. Not once, not occasionally, habitually. There was a woman in my parish, I will not name her, but she was struggling. Her marriage was falling apart. Her children were wild. Her faith was shaky at best. And every Sunday, when I saw her shuffle into the back pew with her wrinkled clothes and her distracted children, I felt it. That pulse, that flash, 3 seconds. Thank God my life is not like hers, and I called it compassion. I called it gratitude for my blessings, but it was not compassion, and it was not gratitude. It was contempt wearing a Sunday dress, and I had been committing it every week for years without confessing it once. Padre Pio told Graziella something else that day in the confessional that explains why this sin is so much more destructive than sins that seem far worse on the surface. He said that God judges sins not primarily by their external severity, but by their internal direction. A sin that moves you away from God but toward repentance is less dangerous than a sin that keeps you exactly where you are while convincing you that you are close to God. Murder drives a person to their knees in horror. Adultery creates guilt that demands confession. Even blasphemy usually produces shame, but contempt produces nothing. No guilt, no shame, no horror, no urge to confess. It leaves the sinner exactly where they were, comfortable, self-assured, spiritually asleep, which is the most dangerous place a soul can be. He compared it to carbon monoxide. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it, you cannot taste it. You feel fine, you feel normal, you feel comfortable, and then you are dead. Spiritual contempt is the carbon monoxide of the soul. It kills without symptoms. And by the time you realize something is wrong, the damage may have been accumulating for decades. Padre Pio told Graziella that he had seen this sin in the confessional more than any other, more than anger, more than lust, more than greed. He said that in a single day of hearing confessions, sometimes 40 or 50 souls in a row, he would see the fracture of contempt in almost half of them, and almost none of them knew it was there. They confessed their anger, they confessed their impatience, they confessed their failures in prayer. But the contempt? Never. Because contempt does not register on a corrupted conscience any more than carbon monoxide registers on a broken detector. He told her about a man who had come to him the previous week, a wealthy landowner from the Gargano who owned 300 hectares of olive groves and employed 40 families. This man confessed that he sometimes missed his evening prayers, that he occasionally lost his temper with his foreman, that he ate meat on a Friday once during Lent. Small sins, honest sins. But Padre Pio could see that this man looked at every one of his 40 tenant families with the same 3-second thought, every single day. Thank God I am the landowner and not the tenant. Thank God I give orders and do not receive them. Thank God my children eat meat every day while theirs eat bread. And the mark on his soul was not a crack, it was a canyon. 40 families, 40 acts of contempt, every single day, for 30 years. The man's soul was so fractured by contempt that Padre Pio said it looked like a piece of glass that had been struck by a hammer, still holding its shape, still looking like a complete soul from the outside, but made entirely of cracks. But here is what nobody expected Padre Pio to say next. And this is the moment where everything Graziella believed about her spiritual life was turned completely upside down. He said, "Graziella, you came here today to confess your sins. You confessed missing prayers, you confessed impatience, you confessed a white lie, and you believed those were your real sins. But I tell you the truth. Those sins are nothing. They are dust on the surface. The real sin, the only sin that is actually endangering your soul right now, is the one you committed in 3 seconds last Thursday in the fish market, and the week before that, and the week before that, for 20 years. And then he said, but there is something even more important you need to understand, that sin is not your worst sin. Your worst sin is this. You came here today. You knelt before God. You opened your mouth to confess, And you did not confess the contempt, not because you were hiding it, but because you genuinely did not know it was a sin. And that means your conscience has been so thoroughly corrupted by this sin that it can no longer detect it. Your spiritual alarm system is broken. The carbon monoxide detector in your soul has been disabled. And that, Graziella, is far more frightening than the contempt itself. Graziella sat in stunned silence. Because Padre Pio was not just diagnosing a sin, he was diagnosing a spiritual condition, a condition in which the instrument meant to detect sin, the conscience, had been so thoroughly infiltrated by the sin itself that it had been turned off from the inside. The fox was not just in the henhouse. The fox was wearing the farmer's clothes and carrying the farmer's keys. Graziella knelt in that confessional broken open for the first time in her life, and she understood with a clarity that was almost physical that she had been living a spiritual lie for 20 years. Not a deliberate lie, something worse, an unconscious one, a lie so deeply embedded in her piety that it had become indistinguishable from her faith. She had confused righteousness with superiority. She had confused devotion with deservingness. She had confused the blessing of a stable life with evidence that God loved her more than he loved Lucia. Padre Pio then told Graziella something that gives me hope every time I think about it. He said that God had brought her to San Giovanni Rotondo not to condemn her, but to save her. That the very fact that she was kneeling in this confessional meant that God had been working to wake her up despite the broken alarm system. God had been sending her signals that she could not hear through her conscience, but that he hoped she would hear through his saint. And then Padre Pio gave her the medicine, not a penance of prayers, though prayers were part of it, something much more specific, something much harder. He told her to go home to Manfredonia and visit Lucia, not to bring her a food basket, not to offer charity from a position of superiority, to go to Lucia's apartment, sit in her kitchen, and ask Lucia to tell her about her life, to listen, not to advise, not to comfort, not to fix, just to listen, for as long as Lucia wanted to talk. And while you listen, Padre Pio said, I want you to repeat one sentence in your heart, over and over, silently, until it becomes as natural as breathing. The sentence is this: she is Christ, and I am honored to be in her presence. Graziella recoiled. She is Christ. Lucia, the woman with the absent husband, and the chickens on the balcony and the laundry basket on her head. Especially Lucia, Padre Pio said, because Christ said, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. And if Lucia is the least in your eyes, then Lucia is the most like Christ in your presence. Your contempt for Lucia is contempt for Christ in disguise. And the cure is to see Christ where you have been seeing someone beneath you. Padre Pio then gave Graziella 3 specific practices to repair the fracture of contempt. 3 commitments she was to make before leaving the confessional. And these 3 practices are not just for Graziella. They are for anyone who has ever, even once, felt superior to another human being, which means they are for every single person listening to this right now, including me. The first practice is the daily reversal prayer. Every morning before beginning the day, pray these words: Lord, today I will meet people I am tempted to look down upon. Show me Christ in every one of them. Remind me that I am no better than the least person I encounter. And if I begin to feel superior, strike that feeling down before it takes root. This prayer, Padre Pio said, is a daily vaccine against contempt. It does not eliminate the temptation, but it makes you aware of it the moment it arrives. It repairs the broken alarm system. The second practice is the weekly examination of contempt. Once a week, review every interaction you had with another person and ask yourself honestly, did I look at anyone and feel better than them? Did I compare myself to anyone and come out on top in my own estimation? Did I feel gratitude not for my blessings, but for not being in someone else's situation? If the answer to any of these is yes, confess it. Do not minimize it. Do not call it something else. Call it what Padre Pio called it, the sin of spiritual contempt, and confess it with the same seriousness you would confess any other sin against the body of Christ. The third practice is the act of deliberate honor. Once a week, find the person you are most tempted to despise, the person you find it hardest to respect, the person who lives a life you are most grateful not to live, and do something that honors them. Not charity, not help given from above, honor given from below. Sit with them, listen to them, ask them about their life. Look them in the eyes and say to yourself, she is Christ, he is Christ, and I am honored to be here. Graziella went home to Manfredonia. She did not visit Lucia immediately. She needed 3 days to find the courage, 3 days of praying the reversal prayer, 3 days of confronting the 20-year mountain of contempt she had never known she was building. On the 4th day, she walked to Lucia's apartment above the butcher shop. She climbed the narrow stairs. She knocked on the door. Lucia opened it with the startled look of a woman who was not accustomed to visitors. Graziella said, "I came to listen. May I sit with you?" Lucia stared at her for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and led Graziella into a kitchen that was smaller than Graziella's bathroom. A single window, a wooden table with 2 chairs, one with a broken leg propped up by a folded newspaper, a crucifix on the wall above a faded calendar from 1956. And Lucia talked. For 2 hours she talked about Pasquale and the day he left with a single suitcase and did not look back, about the loneliness that was not dramatic but constant, like a low hum that never stops, about the nights when she had nothing to feed the children and she boiled water with a bay leaf and a clove of garlic so the house would smell like something was cooking and the neighbors would not know, about washing other women's bedsheets while her own children slept on mattresses stuffed with straw, about the oldest boy, Enzo, who quit school at 13 to work on the fishing boats so his brothers could keep studying, about the shame of being pitied by women like Graziella, who brought food baskets at Christmas, left them at the door, and never once came inside to sit down. And as Lucia talked, Graziella repeated in her heart over and over the sentence Padre Pio had given her, "She is Christ, and I am honored to be in her presence. She is Christ, and I am honored to be in her presence." And somewhere in the 2nd hour, as Lucia described the night her youngest son had a fever and she had no money for a doctor and walked 4 kilometers in the rain to the hospital with the boy in her arms, something cracked inside Graziella. Not the fracture of contempt, something else entirely, something harder and older, the wall she had built between herself and Lucia. The wall she had built between herself and everyone she had ever looked down upon. It cracked, and through the crack, something warm and liquid and unbearably beautiful poured in. Grace. The grace that had been leaking out through the fracture of contempt for 20 years was suddenly, finally, being poured in faster than it could drain. Because the fracture was beginning to heal. Because you cannot feel contempt for someone while you are sitting in their kitchen, looking into their eyes and seeing Christ. Graziella went back to that kitchen every week, every single week for the next 4 years. She brought nothing except herself, no food baskets, no charity, just her presence and her willingness to listen. And something extraordinary happened over those 4 years. The relationship between the 2 women transformed from the careful distance of pity and pride into something neither of them had expected: genuine friendship. Not the kind of friendship between equals, because Graziella learned that Lucia was not her equal. Lucia was her superior, in faith, in courage, in the raw, undecorated holiness of a woman who kept praying while the world crumbled around her. Graziella had prayed because it was scheduled. Lucia had prayed because it was the only thing between her and the void. When Lucia died peacefully in her sleep in 1962, Graziella was there, sitting in the kitchen with the broken chair, holding Lucia's hand, the hand she had spent 20 years looking at with contempt, the hand that was, as Padre Pio had told her, the hand of Christ. And as Lucia's breathing slowed and finally stopped, Graziella whispered one last time the sentence that had changed her life. She is Christ, and I was honored to be in her presence. I've seen it with my own eyes, how quickly contempt can dissolve when you choose to see Christ in the person you despise. That woman in my parish I told you about, the one I silently judged every Sunday, I went to her, not with advice, not with a food basket, with a question. How are you really doing? And she looked at me with eyes that were so tired and so lonely that I had to fight back tears. And I realized that the woman I had been looking down on for years was carrying a cross so heavy that my own problems felt like feathers in comparison. She was not beneath me. She was above me. She was carrying more weight with more faith than I had ever been asked to carry. And my contempt had blinded me to her courage for years. You just learned something that most Catholics will go their entire lives without understanding. You now know that the 3-second sin of spiritual contempt is not a minor thought, but a fracture in the soul that drains every grace you receive. This channel exists to expose the hidden sins that Padre Pio saw destroying souls from the inside, sins that are too small for our broken alarm systems to detect. The super thanks button below is your way of saying these revelations need to keep reaching Catholics who are unknowingly carrying the same dark mark that Graziella carried for 20 years. You are not just watching, you are helping wake people up. And now I am going to ask you to make 3 commitments before you close this video. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now, in the silence of your own heart. First, commit to praying the daily reversal prayer every morning. Lord, show me Christ in every person I meet today. Remind me that I am no better than the least person I encounter. 5 seconds, every morning, starting tomorrow. Second, commit to examining your conscience for contempt once a week, not just for anger, not just for lust, not just for the sins your alarm system still detects, for contempt, for superiority, for the silent 3-second thank God I am not her that flies beneath the radar and leaves its dark mark without a sound. And when you find it, and you will find it because we all carry it, do not excuse it. Do not rename it as gratitude or perspective or discernment. Call it what Padre Pio called it. La frattura del disprezzo, the fracture of contempt. Name it honestly, confess it specifically, and watch the crack in your soul begin to close. Third, commit to 1 act of deliberate honor this week. Find the person you are most tempted to look down upon. Go to them, sit with them, look at them and say in your heart, this person is Christ, and I am honored to be here. Not because it is easy, not because it feels natural, because it is the antidote to the poison that has been silently killing your soul every time you looked at another person and felt anything less than reverence for the image of God they carry. Padre Pio told Graziella that the most terrifying thing about the sin of contempt is not that it condemns souls, it is that it condemns them comfortably. The condemned soul feels fine, feels righteous, feels superior, feels grateful. And all the way to judgment, that soul never once suspects that the 3-second thought it committed 10,000 times is the one that darkened it beyond recognition. Do not be that soul, not for one more day, not for one more 3-second thought. The fracture can heal, the alarm system can be repaired, the grace can stop leaking, but only if you see it, only if you name it, only if you confess it. And only if you choose, starting right now, to look at every human being you encounter and see not someone beneath you, but Christ standing in front of you, waiting to be recognized. Padre Pio said near the end of his life that if he could choose one sin to erase from the world, it would not be murder or adultery or blasphemy. It would be contempt, because murder is rare and produces horror. Adultery is occasional and produces guilt. But contempt is universal and produces nothing. It is the sin that hides inside virtuous people. The sin that grows strongest in those who pray the most. The sin that thrives in churches and parish councils and prayer groups and families where everyone looks holy from the outside while slowly fracturing from within. 3 seconds created the fracture. 3 commitments can heal it. The choice is yours. Make it now. Have you ever caught yourself feeling quietly superior to someone, even for a second? Have you ever thanked God for what you have in a way that was really about being glad you are not someone else? Write 3 seconds in the comments if this video opened your eyes to something you never thought to confess. And if you have already been practicing the custody of your thoughts, write awake. Your honesty will help others recognize the sin they have been carrying without knowing its name.